Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
We celebrate our first big general public event, General Horizon House public event in Anderson Hall. Welcome to the Environment Committee program for December. In the past, Environment Committee programs we've had a number of programs on climate exchange, the climate crisis and what's being done about them. But we have had academics, we've had political leaders, we've had people who are from small nonprofit organizations and larger nonprofit organizations. But there's been a gap. We have not had very much from the corporate part of our world. And corporations are the major part of our economy. They have tremendous influence on the environment, and so we're starting to fill in that gap tonight. Partly thanks very much to Neil McReynolds, who has all kinds of contacts and knowledges, but he introduced us to the person at at Alaska Airlines, who is the vice president, who has as her responsibility sustainability, among other things. Her schedule is so complicated that she said that she would send her best part of her team. And so she has been kind enough to introduce us to the two women who will be speaking tonight. I'd say Alaska Airlines has been among the leadership in the air transport industry, which is one of the really difficult industries to have to deal with climate change, because expending fossil fuels to get these big machines way up at 30,000 feet and then keep them going takes a lot of jet fuel, sends a lot of carbon into the atmosphere. It's similar to the challenges for the steel industry and cement making and so on. But Alaska Airlines is bound to do something about it. And we are privileged to be able to hear Courtney Unruh and Rachel Pack. Courtney is the program manager for sustainability and ESG, and Rachel is a sustainability manager. They will explain Alaska Airlines' balanced, as they describe it to me, balanced long-term approach. It will be innovative, pragmatic, accountable, transparent, and in partnership with others appropriate. They have told us that their plan, the Alaska Airlines plan, is to be carbon neutral by 2040. It's only 17 years. That's an enormous challenge. So we look forward to hearing them, and they will do a little bit of their own introduction. I don't need to start with masters of something or other after their names. But after their comments, we will have comments and questions, and they would have asked us to have a conversation, so that we really hope that you will be thinking about what you will be asking or commenting about, so that after a half an hour, 40 minutes or whatever, they get a chance to get to know us and what our questions are. Thank you for being here, and thank you, Courtney and Rachel, and Rachel will start off.
I'm actually going to kick it off, and then I'll hand it over to Rachel, but I just want to introduce myself quickly. I'm Courtney Unruh, and thank you so much for having us. I have been at Alaska for 5 years now, and started in the project management space, and then moved to the ESG and sustainability team a little over a year ago. And I joked with the group that we had dinner with right before this, that in that time, just that year, the team that I've been a part of has gone through exponential growth. So we were a team of 1, and now we're a team of 3. We've tripled in size, and it's really exciting for me to have Rachel here, one of our teammates, and then we have a third as well. So thank you so much for having us. A little bit about me. I've lived in Seattle for 7 years now. Went to school at the University of Montana before this in Missoula. So I see a few head nods. Perhaps some of you have been to Missoula. It's a great place. I actually don't have a sustainability and environmental background by the books. I studied Spanish in college, and so this is definitely a different career field I didn't think I would be in a while back in school. And then I moved to Seattle, started working at Alaska on the project management side of things, and worked primarily on diversity, equity, inclusion, and sustainability projects. And so luckily a job opened up on this team, and I had some background through past projects and work, and was really lucky to be able to get the position. So I'm going to hand it over to Rachel, who does have legitimate schooling in this and can teach us a thing or two. I'll let her introduce herself and then kick us off with the presentation. But thank you again for having us. We're excited to be here tonight.
Hi, I'm Rachel Peck. I am a sustainability manager at Alaska Airlines. I joined Alaska Airlines about 6 months ago. And so prior to joining Alaska Airlines, I was based in Houston, Texas, and I worked at Cisco, the food distribution company. And I've always been in the corporate social responsibility, environmental social governance space. So I grew up in Indiana and went through like preschool all the way to grad school there. And so I was first exposed to just the environmental field, just through like an AP environmental science class that I took, and just seeing the different environmental injustices through case study examples and projects that we did, and specifically close to home. We had this project where we were helping Habitat for Humanity with this case that they were presented. Specifically, they had built a neighborhood over very contaminated land that a company basically just did not disclose and didn't share that it was polluted, and they just sold it off. And so Habitat for Humanity builds homes for low-income families, and just coming from a low-income household, and I think it just kind of hit close to home, and it really made me think about what I wanted to do for college. So I graduated with, I did like a 3-2 master's program, and so I graduated with a Master of Public Affairs in Environmental Management and Natural Policy Resources Management. And so I went through different types of internships, and I landed in an environmental health and safety and sustainability consulting firm. And that's where I was first exposed to how the corporate world is actually tackling situations like the case study that I studied back in high school. And also, it made me realize that the corporate sector is not all bad, that there are good people out there and actually in the workforce and actually changing from the inside out. And just through that internship, I realized that my Master of Public Affairs doesn't mean that I'm stuck in the public sector forever. And so that's how I started my career in environmental social governance and corporate social responsibility. Okay, so I'll kick us off and just kind of introduce what sustainability is, and give a little context around what sustainability is at Alaska Airlines. I know that there's a lot of words on here, but it's not as complicated as it looks. So sustainability is about meeting the needs without without compromising the ability to our future generation, while meeting all of our needs. And so when you think about the stakeholders that Alaska Airlines has, we can go on and on, but I kind of grouped the key stakeholders. And so when you think about our stakeholders, it's mainly our guests, our corporate customers, where we fly, which is the local communities, government agencies like the FAA, TSA, our suppliers, our nonprofit partnerships that we have with various organizations, our investors and our shareholders, and employees like me and Courtney. And I would say because of all of the stakeholder engagement that companies deal with and engage with, this field called environmental social governance kind of came into play. And I would say a lot of different companies in the private sector, they call it different things. So environmental social governance is what we call it at Alaska Airlines. There's sustainability or corporate sustainability, there's corporate social responsibility. All of that is essentially the same. It's just the social good and the greater good of what a company can do. That's essentially what ESG is and what sustainability is. And so for us to be able to be transparent and accountable at Alaska Airlines based on what stakeholders want, we have our 2025 ESG goals that are kind of, I would say, like halfway-ish goals to our 2040 net zero goal that we have. And so I won't go into all the goals that we have, but essentially we have, I would say, I think it's 20 ESG goals. And so we have, I was not here at Alaska when they created and established these 2025 ESG goals, but from my understanding, Alaska Airlines went through just a process of identifying what is important to our key stakeholders and what's important to Alaska Airlines. So specifically in our environmental goals, we've identified that carbon, waste, and water are key areas that we should be focused on reducing our impact. So by 2025, we have these various goals within our carbon, waste, and water. So making sure that the water we use and consume, we're not just depleting the resources and not, giving back. So we offset our water, for example, our water usage. And then for waste, we're trying to reduce our packaging of our in-flight items, and we're also restarting. We have restarted our recycling program in our flights, and so that's another goal we have. And then we hope to continue to look into our operations and make it, I would say, just greener and make it less impactful to our environment. And so as you can see on the very top, in the very right side of the slide, Alaska Airlines is quite transparent in terms of where we're ahead, where we lag, and where we remain on track or flat year over year. Not a lot of companies actually do that. I would say a lot of companies are quite aware of how the public perceives the company. So, for example, if they're lagging in certain areas, they may not share that as much, or they may highlight other areas where they want to show off and brag about. But Alaska Airlines is quite transparent, and we want to remain accountable to our loyal stakeholders, such as our guests and our customers, and we want to be honest in terms of how we truly get to 2040 and to become net zero. And so we've also identified our social goals. It just varies within community involvement and our making sure that throughout our supply chain that we're treating everyone fairly. And that especially as we continue to hire, that we're hiring equitably, that we're hiring in a diverse and fair way. And then we also have our governance goals. As you can see, it ranges from safety, crisis management, all the way to making sure that we have responsible financial management principles. And so even here, I would say governance is quite new also to the environmental social governance space and corporate social responsibility. And governance is, I wouldn't say a tricky topic, but in terms of, I would say previously it's very much within like finance, accountability, and like financial reporting. But now I think the big trend, especially from key stakeholders, is that they want to see socially responsible companies regardless of where they come from and regardless of the sector they're in. So yeah. And then I think Courtney, we're gonna go.
Okay, so I had heard one just question about what does ESG stand for. I think Rachel covered it, but environmental, social, and governance. Rachel and I focus mostly on the E, so the environmental portion, but our company has goals in place for all three, so we wanted to just show that quickly. I think we're gonna do a quick video, yes, on what is net zero, and then I'm gonna take us through more details on our E goals, or our path to net zero by 2040.
We've all heard about climate change, and now everyone's talking about reaching net zero. But how are they related? Let's start with the problem. Climate change has been triggered by an excess of greenhouse gases, such as carbon dioxide and methane, in the Earth's atmosphere. These gases trap the heat from the sun, which warms our planet even more. We're already seeing the effects through more extreme weather and melting polar ice contributing to rising sea levels. And this will only get worse if our planet's temperature continues to rise. One way we can all help is to do our bit to get to net zero. But what exactly is net zero? Think about running a bath. Turn on the taps and water is added. Pull out the plug and water flows out. To keep the water at the same level, you need to ensure what you put in and what you take out is balanced. Reaching net zero works in a similar way. We need to balance the amount of greenhouse gases we put into the atmosphere with the amount we take out. What we do to limit emissions in the next decades is critical to our future. From countries and companies to families and individuals, we can all play a role in our journey to net zero, which will help slow climate change.
Okay, so sorry if that was repetitive, but we thought it was good context, since now we're going to go into a slide about our goals for, let's see if I can get this to work, our path to net zero. Can I get help? Changing the slide. Perfect.
There it is.
No worries. Okay. Wonderful. So, when we were creating our strategy to net zero, we bucketed our work into 5 main areas of focus. And the goals that Rachel just showed, like she mentioned, were kind of interim milestone goals to get us to this end goal of net zero by 2040. So you've seen some insight into our 2025 goals. We're creating our 2030 and 2035 goals as well, because we want to make sure that we're really holding ourselves accountable and hitting those milestones necessary to reach this end ultimate goal. So I'll walk us through this graphic a little bit, but you'll see that the 5 main categories are operational efficiency, fleet renewal, sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF, novel propulsion, which is a fancy word for electric aircraft, and then the last one, offsetting technology. So I'm just going to give a few little tidbits about each one, and then I'm happy to answer questions now, but I think we've got some time at the end as well for questions, so I presume this might bring up a few. So starting first on operational efficiency, we have put a ton of different initiatives in place at Alaska to reduce our impact from the get-go. And those are the operational efficiency initiatives that are listed at the bottom here, like a program called APU reduction, like another program called single engine taxi. This is really Rachel's main area of focus, and we've got another slide in a minute. I'm gonna let her walk you through some of the top ones. But just know that this one is like the line, what can we reduce from the get-go, and then we don't have to ideally go to carbon offsetting technology for those emissions. Next is fleet renewal. We're all in Seattle, so you might have seen the announcement recently that Alaska is going to move to a single fleet. We bought a ton of different aircraft from Boeing, I think the biggest order ever. And so the Boeing MAX aircraft was a part of this plan because they're 25% more efficient than the airplanes they'll be replacing in our fleet than those older aircraft. So I have a couple other things on here for fleet renewal, a few other projects that we've been involved in that have to do with creating a more efficient fleet. One I talked about at dinner was the partnership with Boeing through the Eco Demonstrator project. So this was a really awesome project that Alaska was involved in with this aircraft at Boeing that tested all of this really great sustainable technology. And the hope is that these MAX aircrafts get more and more and more efficient as we take ownership of them, and we're working with Boeing to try to make that happen by testing all of this new technology and ideally making these aircraft as efficient as possible. Third, and where I spend most of my time, is on sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF. So this is definitely the airline industry's biggest opportunity to decarbonize as quickly as possible, and this is something that's actually available to us now. So the next slide goes deeper into kind of the different types of SAF, what it's made of, what's available now, what's available in 10 years. So I'll talk through that in more depth. But definitely, we have a big challenge on our hands. Like Jean said, to get these huge aircraft up in the sky and flying, it's a lot of fuel. And that's our biggest opportunity currently, is to make sure that that fuel is as green as possible. Fourth is novel propulsion, so electric aircraft, and we even got this question at dinner, like, when are we gonna have electric aircraft? And I would say, you're gonna have very, 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 very small electric aircraft that can take 2 or 4 people maybe in the next 5 years. But as far as big electric aircraft that could fly from here to Portland, we're not going to see that for a while. So we're working on it now, and we're partnering with a company called Zero Avia that's actually working on that plane that is fully electric up in Payne, at Payne Field up in Everett. And Alaska donated one of our airplanes to Zero Avia to do all of these tests, but they're not expecting the plane to be available until 2035, 2040. It'd also be for short flights, like I said, here to Portland. So not super, super far, just because it's so much weight, those batteries, to fly, and then you have to recharge. So we're working on it. A lot of other companies and airlines are working on it as well, and we're very excited about that opportunity, but definitely want to pick up the pace and get those planes available quick. And then last but not least is the carbon offsetting technology I mentioned. To get to net zero by 2040, we realize that there's probably going to be pieces of our business that we're just not going to be able to get down to zero. And so we put this in here, again, because we are a transparent company. We don't want to say that we're going to be able to fully reduce everything by 2040 when we know that's not true. But when we do use carbon offsets, we want to use very credible, high quality carbon offsets that are verified, ideally carbon capture technology or direct air capture, so that we're really using the best possible offsetting option out there to reduce our impact. So that was a lot of talking and words on a slide. I'm going to go a little further into SAF, or sustainable aviation fuel. And like I said, happy to answer questions on this at the end. We've definitely left some time for questions. So really quickly, there's 4 different kinds of sustainable aviation fuel available today. And on this slide, they kind of range from what is currently available to what kind of the cream of the crop is at the very, very end. And currently, the sustainable aviation fuel that's available today is called HEFA fuel. It's this one all the way on the left, and it's made from fats, oils, greases. A while back, you probably heard about people driving cars based off McDonald's grease and fat from French fries. Think of that as the HEFA fuel. So that's what we have today, and it's actually being produced today. Alaska uses this fuel. We use it out of San Francisco, and we use it for any of our flights out of Boeing Field, any delivery flights or test flights that we would do out of Boeing Field on Alaska aircraft, we use it as well. It's really expensive, and there's barely any of it available. So I would say those are the two biggest takeaways for sustainable aviation fuel right now. It's 3 to 5 times more expensive than regular jet fuel, and we have like 0.01% of our fuel that's sustainable aviation fuel because it's just not being made. We can't get our hands on it. But it's not all doom and gloom, because in the next few years, and as we work our way down this chart, more sustainable aviation fuel out of more sustainable materials is going to be produced. And Alaska has a lot of partnerships in place already to get our hands on that fuel in the future. So as far as kind of the next type of fuel that we'll see available, it's called alcohol to jet. We've actually already made a huge purchase of this fuel starting in 2026 for 175 million gallons of sustainable aviation fuel. So this is a lot. This is like by far the biggest sustainable aviation fuel purchase we've ever done. We have been buying HEFA fuel in the past, but nothing to this scale. So we're really excited about that and the decarbonization that that fuel can bring to our operation. Working our way down, gasification or Fischer-Tropsch is what the FT stands for technology. This is really interesting. It's fuel made from tons of different wastes. Think like forestry waste, which we obviously have a lot of here in the Pacific Northwest, but even companies are trapping the methane off of landfills and making that into sustainable aviation fuel. So that's the company that we're working with now. They're called Sky Energy, and they trap methane off of municipal solid waste or landfills and turn it into fuel. Really excited about that. It's taking a while, obviously, to get all the technology totally figured out, so we'll see that more in the 2028 timeframe. And then last, power to liquid fuel. So this is fuel where you suck carbon out of the air and then recycle it and make it into airline jet fuel. So if you're thinking about being net zero, you really are taking from the air and then turning it into jet fuel. It's really low carbon intense fuel, and we're working with a company right now that is currently making this in the lab. To get it to be large scale will take a while as well, so I put them at the end of the timeline there. But we're really excited about that partnership, and they have done small scale test flights, so we're planning on doing one of those with them soon. But just to be able to get that fully in our operation, get their plants up and running, it will take a while. I never thought when I started at Alaska that I would be working on sustainable aviation fuel, so this is definitely, my career has taken an interesting turn, but I'm really interested in this and really like it. So if people have questions at the end, let me know. I will talk your ear off about SAF. Okay. Moving on, I'm going to let Rachel talk a little bit about some of the operational efficiency measures that we've got in place.
Yes, so when Courtney was talking about how operational efficiency initiatives are initiatives that we can start now to help decarbonize, these are, I would say, like our 3 main examples and our current initiatives. So the current issue that we have, I would say, not just Alaska Airlines, but all US airlines, and honestly I would say all airlines in general, is the fact that our preconditioned air is, so actually I'll take a step back. So APU is the actual engine on our airplanes where it keeps the power on. And so when and preconditioned air is just basically ground power from the airport. And so ideally, the situation is that when a pilot comes and parks the aircraft, we want to not keep the APU on, and we want to connect to ground power, so the PCA. But the issue is that it doesn't always happen that way. Through various things like the ramp agents may not be prepared, they're dealing with other stuff, or the actual PCA unit is broken, so they have to run the engine, for example. So there are many different scenarios where it doesn't really happen. And I would say a fun fact, but not so fun fact, is that every minute the APU is on, it burns half a gallon of jet fuel. So it's quite carbon intensive just leaving the aircraft on, especially if it's quote unquote a quick turnaround. So even if it's like a 2-hour wait or maybe 30-hour wait, that's still quite a lot of emissions that we're just burning just because of leaving the APU on. And so I would say Alaska's big effort is to get our pilots and our in-flight people and our ramp agents to come together and make sure that our PCA is connected and that APU engines are turned off. For our engine wash program, this recently started, I would say like the second half of 2022. This is where it's pretty simple. Like as it says, we wash our engines so that it can be cleaner and more efficiently used. I don't remember the specific carbon savings with that, but regardless of how much water we use, it's not as water intensive either. So when people bring up how engine washes may not be actually have as much environmental savings, when you think the whole business case that Alaska conducted was that the engine will still last longer and it will help with the carbon savings of that. So right now, we're still at that beginning stage where it's being tested, and right now we're going through the below 40 degree operational procedures. So obviously in Seattle it gets cold, and so right now we're kind of going through the testing process of making sure that it's still still has environmental savings even in the cold. So I think that's where the engine wash program is at. And then with Flyways, it's essentially a dispatch tool where dispatch can use the Flyways the technology, and I believe it calculates based on the different flights available that a pilot can take essentially. It can calculate its carbon savings, and if there's a better opportunity, it will basically suggest to the pilot that they should take this flight instead. And I would say that is, I don't know if you have anything else, but yeah, it's a carbon savings tool for basically a different team. Instead of the sustainability team, it's for dispatch, and yeah.
All right. Okay, I think maybe I'm just not good at this, but okay, there we go. Rachel talked earlier about our recycling program at Alaska Airlines. We wanted to bring this in. If any of you have ever flown Alaska Airlines, which I'm hopeful most of you have since you're here in Seattle, you'll notice that our flight attendants recycle on the plane. So this is something we're really proud of. It is actually, it started from a group of really passionate flight attendants that were upset about how much we were throwing out and said, I want to teach my peers to recycle. And so now it's in all of our catering contracts, and all of our vendors have to follow this process as well. So anyways, this is just a couple funny photos of Rachel and I and the rest of either people we were able to convince to come along with us, or a couple of our other closer teammates are in those photos as well. So we go and we check in, we collect all the trash and recycling that comes off of a flight, and we check in and see if our flight attendants are doing it right, and how well we're doing each year, which is always a messy experience. We call it getting covered in trash juice, because that's usually what happens in those audits. So look next time you fly for our recycling program in flight. And then, similar to recycling and a lot of the operational efficiency measures, we're also trying to just reduce from the onset. And so we're working with our products team to reduce our packaging, to move to more sustainable materials. So we got rid of plastic water bottles on board. We moved to a company called Box Water. And so no more plastic water bottles on board. We're moving to paper cups. So you won't see the plastic cups on board soon either. And then we're working to get compostable materials as well as just recyclable materials and more aluminum. So really, really working to make our in-flight cabin experience sustainable, just like we're trying to do across the rest of the operation. Okay. All you.
Yep. So when I did the introduction of what environmental social governance is, this is making flying matter is more within the social part of ESG. And so part of Alaska Airlines social responsibility, we run this week of care. Actually, I believe it's the whole month of November, but specifically we have a week of care where it is for all of our Alaska Air Group employees, and they can go out and go volunteer at any 501c3 nonprofit and give time and or donation to a charitable cause. And so this past month's week of care, we actually volunteered at quite across all of our network, and so I believe this specifically highlights the Idaho Food Bank, also Habitat for Humanity in Tukwila, and Lifelong in Seattle, and the Blanchett House in Portland. And so our peers in the public affairs space, they organize different volunteer events, and basically our employees can go and volunteer. And the next slide, let's see. Another part of our social good, I would say, is the Honor Flight Network. So obviously Alaska Airlines flies to different places, and so one of the opportunities that we take is that we fly our veterans across the United States, and they are able to go to Washington, D.C., and I believe any other places that have a memorial museum or anything like that where we can honor our veterans. And so for this year, for Giving Tuesday, we actually flew out 28 veterans across 3 different wars, so World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War, and we flew their caregivers as well from Honolulu to Washington, D.C., so that they can see the memorial there.
Then we just have a couple more slides, and then we're going to open it up to questions. The last few are also in kind of the S space of the ESG structure. And so we wanted to highlight just a couple other opportunities where we're out in the communities that we fly to. So this one ties nicely to S, but also a little bit into the environmental space. So we work closely with an organization called BEF, or the Bonneville Environmental Foundation. We donate money to them each year, and they do a lot of our different water restoration projects throughout the Pacific Northwest. And so one of our goals that Rachel talked about at the very beginning is making sure that our water footprint, we don't deplete the places that we are using our resources, and so our water footprint is a big piece of that, and this is the organization that we work with to make sure that we're keeping that really closely in check. And so we sponsor a few different restoration projects. One most recently is up near Leavenworth. There's a place called Icicle Creek, and we've been doing a lot of different restoration up there. We've done different restoration projects through them where we'll restore salmon spawning habitat, and so we've been working with them for a while, and will continue to do so. On this screen you see the plane, the whale plane. It's called West Coast Wonders. It was named by a group of our employees. But this is a really fun airplane that we did in partnership with Promise the Pod, and so we work with a couple other environmental organizations to make sure also that we're highlighting their missions and working closely with them to support their goals. And so this is an example sort of how we do that. Our boss says that we have this awesome opportunity. We have basically a flying billboard, and so we should use our planes as flying billboards to help spread these messages, and I really love that. And every time I see this plane, I get really, really excited. And then a few other organizations that we work with that we wanted to highlight for you guys, and we had a request to kind of highlight, like, as a traveler, what can I do tomorrow when I go on my flight to be more sustainable? And so if you're flying to Hawaii, you can volunteer with an organization called Travel to Change. So they're an ecotourism organization, but they're run by local Hawaiian folks that really care about their local community, and they want travelers to leave a positive impact. And so on the next page, we'll have a few photos of our last flight we did there during Earth Month. So we led a group to Hawaii with the Travel to Change organization, which anybody can do an activity with Travel to Change. You don't have to be an Alaska employee, but this is just an example of that. And so there were different habitat restoration programs that people did, and then also different cleanup activities. And like I said, that's kind of open to anyone that travels. I didn't put it in the deck, but we did have a request, like I said, to talk about a couple other ways you can be a sustainable traveler. So I thought maybe I would hit on a couple of those now, and then I forgot about that slide, so I'm going to hit on those, and then we'll go to that slide. So to be a more sustainable traveler, a few main ways is anything that you can do to help reduce fuel burn. So taking a direct flight instead of a flight that has layovers is always a great idea. Usually if you have a layover, you're traveling extra miles that aren't necessary, so any direct flight will help. Packing less. I love bringing my extra suitcase too, but we have to put extra fuel on the plane for extra bags. So if you can go with just one bag instead of two, that's also always a great idea. And then in the future, Alaska's starting some really awesome programs to educate our travelers and bring them along as far as being able to offset your flight or donate for sustainable, to fly yourself on sustainable aviation fuel. I mentioned before that it's 3 to 5 times more expensive and we can't get our hands on it, but if we have people asking for it, demanding that we use it, and willing to be a part of the solution, that's definitely going to push us in the right direction. And so we're starting this program. It'll be with our elite group first, so if some of you are frequent flyers, you may get to test it out, and that will happen middle of next year, 2023, and then we'll roll it out to the general public a little bit after that. So keep your eye out for that. We'll have to send Jean and Neil a little FYI when we're starting, so you guys can spread the word. Last slide, I believe, is a little bit more on a couple other programs that we have just to kind of build the next generation of people that are interested in aviation. And so we wanted to highlight a couple of these before going into questions. So we have 2 programs that we're really excited about that just started. One, to really build our technician pipeline. We're working super closely with a group down in Portland to do that, donated airplanes for them so that they can practice their maintenance and technician skills there and build that pipeline for Alaska. And then second program is this one on the right-hand side, which is called True North, and it's a program aimed at building our pipeline for pilots of color and BIPOC pilots. And we're really excited about this because it helps remove a lot of the barriers for people that would generally not be able to maybe pay for flight school. So we'll help them pay for that. We'll make sure that they can get the adequate funding and then guarantee a position at our feeder airline, Horizon Air, that then you can apply to be a pilot at Alaska. So it's a really nice pipeline program that we have that we're really excited about. And specifically working with students of color, which is amazing. So with that, I think we're done with the presentation and available to answer questions for the remainder of the time.
Please raise your hand, we'll get a microphone to you. There's mics in each aisle.
Phil.
Bill, got one right there.
Pepper.
Okay, perfect. Hi, Bill.
Hi. I just recently read that France is going to institute a program to prohibit short-haul flights. Has there been any talk of that happening in this country?
Okay. Short answer is yes, there's been talk of it. And so we actually have a meeting on Friday to talk a little bit about if there's an opportunity to maybe use electric buses for some of Alaska's shorter routes, maybe to get people like to Seattle and then on the longer routes. So yes, there's been discussion. Politically, I don't think it will be mandated in the US, as Europe usually seems to be a little bit ahead of us in that space.
But France has a train system that would compensate.
Yeah.
We don't have.
Yes, good point. So he was saying France has a really great train system and infrastructure that we just don't have. So I don't think that would be mandated anytime soon in the US. However, I think we're always at Alaska looking for creative opportunities to reduce emissions, get people where they need to go, have a some impact on our communities. And so yeah, we were having a conversation on Friday about opportunities for electric buses or any other creative ideas. Great.
I have two comments.
Perfect.
One of them is about the airplanes. You said for sustainability, you're ordering newer airplanes that are more environmentally friendly, which sounds wonderful, except what do you do with the old ones? They're going to be sold to somebody else that's going to fly them. Either that or they're going to be flown directly to the desert where they will sit in infamy. And that doesn't seem too terribly sustainable to me.
Yeah.
The other comment that I have to make is in the flight planning, you talked something, and I maybe misunderstood you, but it seemed to me that you said that they could help the planes fly in a more environmentally friendly way. And when you look at the amount of traffic that these places have to deal with, there is no way that they can do that. I would rather that they be concerned with our safety than whether we're flying in an environmentally safe path.
Okay, I'll take a stab at the second question first. So Flyaways, Flyaways is the program that you're referring to, and it has a whole algorithm with safety always being number one. So I will say any flight that is unsafe, which is not a flight that Alaska Airlines will take, throughout the whole company, safety is always the top priority. I would love for people to have sustainability as the top priority sometimes, but safety, no matter what, is always the top priority, and so you would never take a flight that was deemed unsafe. With that being said, the program basically flies in a more direct path. So you can think about it as like Google Maps, but for a dispatch person to plan a more direct flight. So that's how you would cut down on your carbon emissions, is just being more direct. And there are a lot of instances where you just cannot use a Flyways route because of the traffic around different cities. So like up and down the East Coast, it doesn't work that way because you're flying in out of New York and Boston and all of these cities that are just too much traffic. Where we see the most benefit in the Flyways program is long flights, maybe across the US, where if you avoided like this thunderstorm, then you would be able to go more direct. So yeah, we're definitely still working with that program to make it as efficient as possible, but you would never compromise safety for that. The second question was around retiring old aircraft, yes. So some of those aircraft are sold to other companies, you're right. and they'll use those. But I will say that we'll use those in place of their old aircraft, so it is better than the aircraft that they're retiring. But a lot of the aircraft that we take in, so they're like 25% more efficient, but a lot of those aircraft were retiring aircraft like A320s, and those are going to other, I had a point, but I'm kind of forgetting where I'm going with that.
What happens to them if they're not used by another?
So they would get retired, the parts would get recycled, and thank you, that was actually my point. So the parts would get recycled and back to other airplane manufacturers, like the A320s, a lot of those parts are kind of manned, and so they'll get taken apart and reused and recycled for other aircraft distributors and other airlines. Yep. What did I miss? Rachel might have a little bit more on that quickly.
A quick note on that is if they are sold to different airlines, Alaska Airlines isn't the only especially US airline that has an environmental social governance strategy. So I would say all major US airlines, they do track and they have their own goals. So they track their carbon emissions, and even if they are buying like our old aircrafts, for example, they still have their own separate initiatives that help reduce their impact ultimately too. So I would say that's also one way, even if it is sold to a different airline, they still have their own initiatives to keep reducing their impact.
I have a question over here.
Yep.
Hi, I'm assuming that there are trade-offs between speed and efficiency. Can you comment on that, and maybe altitude as well, in terms of how Alaska decides on what it's going to do to go from one place to another?
Yeah. Okay. I actually don't know about speed, so I can potentially follow up with you guys about that. I can ask about it and send an email, but I do know about altitude. There is some work being done right now with the FAA about if flying at a lower altitude is less impactful for carbon emissions. And for those trails you see coming out of the airplane, they're called contrails. And we believe that flying at a lower altitude is probably less impactful for those that have air particles they leave behind. So that is one thing that maybe we didn't touch on a ton in this presentation, but is all of the coalitions and the political work that we're doing to try to work with government agencies like the FAA and others to change rules that then also make flying more sustainable. And so the altitude thing is definitely something we're looking into. Yeah. Not so sure about speed though, sorry. Yes,
Why do
Henry.
they fly so high now?
Why do we fly so high now, is the question. I am not a pilot, so I could not tell you, I'm sorry. Do you know?
The only comment I can make in terms of like our environmental impact is I feel like our main material focus is like our load factor and like the efficiency aspect more than we haven't really touched upon like speed and all of that. Yeah. And but we can look into it.
And definitely with the aircraft, beyond buying the most efficient aircraft that we can, we want to make sure that that aircraft can use as much sustainable aviation fuel as possible. And so we're putting a lot of our focus right now instead of maybe on speed and altitude, although we are looking at altitude on fuel and getting the best fuel we can.
Here's a question.
Yeah.
Yes, recently I read an article about some airline somewhere looking at reducing the cockpit from 2 pilots down to 1 pilot. And I'm wondering if that's a weight-saving strategy. And more seriously, is Alaska looking at, or is our future somewhere going to be pilotless planes?
Great questions. Potentially that is a weight-saving strategy. I will say I really really cannot ever imagine Alaska flying with less than 2 pilots. So 2, 1, or sorry, 1 or 0 is not on the table. Yeah, and I don't think our pilot union would love that either. So I think we're gonna stick to 2. What else? These are great questions.
Any questions?
Cool, we'll come there next. Yeah, right here.
We're all kind of wondering about Boeing these days with all these engineers resigning, and you're about to buy all these planes from Boeing. Are they on board with all this environmental stuff? Are they actually able to do it, or are they cutting corners on? I mean, obviously you're monitoring it, but it kind of scares me that you're buying all new planes.
That's fair. We're definitely monitoring it, and say we have extremely stringent safety and then also maintenance procedures. And so we're in very close contact with Boeing on all of the newest updates for all of the aircraft. And I'm so confident, that's a good point, in Alaska Airlines pilot training as well. It's above and beyond a lot of the pilots in the industry, especially because to fly in and out of Alaska, you need a lot of extra certifications. It's a very tricky place to land. I was talking with Barbara about that at dinner, just how crazy it could be landing in Juneau and some of these other places, and our pilots really, I feel like, are some of the best in the business with all of the extra training and hours that they take before flying. So I would say we're pretty confident in the new Boeing aircraft, and especially our pilots' ability to handle them.
Sure. How much thought do you put into your flight planning and scheduling with regards to trying to minimize the environmental impact?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I will say you've seen a lot of the initiatives that we're currently working on, and working with network and scheduling is something that will likely be on our list as kind of the next set of topics that we need to handle. I think there's absolutely an opportunity to make sure that we're better using the more efficient aircraft that we have. So putting all of our efficient aircraft on our longest, most full routes, things like that we probably haven't fully tapped into. And so I think there's opportunity too within like the IT and software space to invest in technology that helps us do that, just like we did with flyaways. But we're just not quite there yet. Like I said, we're a team of 3, so that'll be next on the docket.
Do you happen to know a lot of the things that airplanes do in terms of routes and altitudes and speeds and locations and stuff are not within your control? They're controlled by the FAA. And I used to work for the FAA, and we had a lot of concern about environmental impacts. In my day, this is back in the Wright brothers' day, I guess, but we had a lot of work to do with noise.
Yeah.
How do you route the airplanes into airports, into metropolitan areas, what altitudes, and so on. And I just wonder, do you know if the FAA has got some kind of a task force going on the question of how the management of air traffic can have impacts on the environment and how that might be minimized and the harms?
Yeah.
I think that's definitely an opportunity of, I know that in 2023 one of our initiatives is to engage with more of like the government agencies such as the FAA. I would say currently we work more closely with airports. So for example, SeaTac, with their task force, SeaTac for example has specific quiet hours. So Alaska and other airlines, we don't arrive, I would say, I think it's 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. So there are like noise control and I want to say policies, but there are like guidelines and a task force in place, and we work more with airports more than the FAA. So that is one area we recognize that we'll be focusing more on.
I've read that the air quality around airports is much more difficult for people's health. The people that are living around the airports are exposed to much more pollution and have higher, in some cases, different kinds of health problems. Does your airline give any thought to that sort of thing? Is there any way to cut down on that kind of pollution?
I'll let Rachel comment a little bit on that. One thing I wanted to say about another reason that we're so interested in sustainable aviation fuel is because that significantly helps communities around the airports and those places. And so we're working really, really hard. Currently, we can only use it in San Francisco because of the infrastructure, so we're working really hard with SeaTac to start using sustainable aviation fuel here because it is so much better for the communities. And SeaTac's super interested in it, even wanting to help pay to get that fuel in their airport just because it is so much better, like I said. So I think we definitely recognize that there's areas of improvement and that we have a responsibility for the communities that we serve and the people that live near those airports, and we need to use more of the sustainable fuel.
Yeah, as Courtney mentioned, because SAF isn't fully scaled yet, it's not something we can just go out and buy. I think that's why our operational efficiency initiatives are so important. So when you think about the APU reduction that I was mentioning, how we should be connecting to ground power. I know, for example, SeaTac is just one of the many airports that also have their own sustainability and ESG goals where they're looking more into reducing their impacts as well. And so making sure we're connecting to that so we can turn off our engines and also even our ground service equipment, electrifying what we can, hybridizing what we can too, so that we can reduce those the impact that we have on the airports is something that I know in 2023 we're really focusing on.
Thank you. Alaska Airlines should be commended for what you're doing as yourself as a leader in the industry. I guess I was worried about in terms of the obstacles you're going to have to clear to make this thing work. Are there things, areas where you really see some real serious, you have some serious concerns now that may happen down the road between now and 2040? And is there something the rest of us could do to be helpful to Alaska? And the other thing I want to commend you on for the leadership you're providing in the airline industry. Set an example for other airlines too. I hope they're paying attention. So, David, interesting the obstacles you face.
Yeah. So I'll go first. I think, and this is very much because I'm working on this day in and day out, but for me, our nearest opportunity to make the biggest impact, again, is sustainable aviation fuel. And so anything you can do to elect leaders that believe in climate change and to push for local airports to use more sustainable aviation fuel, to buy sustainable aviation fuel when it becomes available as an offset for your flight, and to really get SAF out there to scale, grow the market, talk to your politicians about how we need it, how vital that is to changing this business. That for me would be kind of my main piece of advice and my plea for this group. So Rachel might have a couple more thoughts on that as well. No. There's a bit more questions, so
okay.
We'll leave it at that.
Sorry.
My remarks are not a question, but I think we should give some credit to the Boeing company for the folded wingtips. If you are not aware, the new generation of airplanes have wingtips that fold up, and they save fuel. How much? I don't know, but I have heard people say likely 10%. Most new aircraft from the Boeing company will have folded wingtips to save fuel. That's what we're doing now, not in the future.
Yeah.
Right now.
Yeah,
Thanks to the Boeing company and the engineering staff that no one seems to give them credit for.
well, it's a great point. All of the new aircraft that we're buying have the wingtips on it, and that was actually a project on a past eco demonstrator aircraft. So I mentioned when I first kind of came into the sustainability space, I was a project manager for this eco demonstrator aircraft, which was in partnership with Boeing, and the wingtip came from that. And so these projects that they're testing on those test aircrafts really do end up on future aircraft and make flying more sustainable.
Wow, that's great.
Another comment.
Yeah.
There's an elephant in the room. I haven't heard anyone mention engines.
Yes. No, it's a good point. So the engines that we use on our aircrafts, they're CFM is the engine manufacturer for our Boeing aircraft. And we are working really closely with them. They've got a very in-depth plan on how to make their engines more efficient as well. And as those become available and safe and are tested, we would absolutely consider using those engines on future Boeing aircraft. So it's a good point, and it's an interesting point that it's like not just the aircraft manufacturer, it's not just the airline, that there's all these different players throughout the supply chain that we need to be working with and making sure that everybody's working towards the same goal. And so it's definitely, it's a big job because there's so many players that need to be involved in reading from the same sheet of music.
Well, we promised people that they would have a chance to go home, but I know there are probably hundreds more questions. To some extent, you're invited to come up and talk individually with Courtney and Rachel, and be sure that you watch and tell all your friends to watch this same event which is just being video recorded. It will be played on HHTV 370 on this Friday afternoon at 3:30 in the afternoon, so you can tell your friends about that. So, your questions about alcohol, ethanol, I thought that wasn't good in cars, that you're yeah. Whatever questions you need to come and talk, feel free, and keep on thinking about what you individually can do, and take advantage of Neil's question and Courtney's answer, and thank you all very much for coming.